I can't believe I'm risking my neck for a tin can, Cadden muttered, prying open the rusted hatch of what used to be a maintenance tunnel. Could be worse, Leora replied, her voice echoing down the damp corridor. You could be risking it for a tin can that bites back. The satellite Metropolis, once a bustling jewel of human ingenuity orbiting a barren moon, now lay scattered like a forgotten jigsaw puzzle without a box lid. Whole sections drifted off in the void, as useful as a screen door on a starship. Still, people like Cadden, with a knack for seeing potential in the decrepit and derelict, thrived in the chaos. Scavengers, some called them. Opportunists, others sneered. You think the aliens left us any good toys? Cadden asked, more to keep the silence at bay than expecting an answer. If by toys you mean weapons that could disintegrate you on a bad day, then yeah, Leora said, her tone as dry as the Martian sands. But hey, maybe the aliens were sentimental types. Left us a few photo albums or love letters written in gibberish. A romantic alien's the last thing we need. Imagine the divorce settlements, Cadden said, grinning despite himself. The pair moved cautiously, their flashlights cutting through the dust-laden gloom like fragile spears. The air was heavy with the scent of rust and regret, perfume for a world gone sour. They were knee-deep in the underbelly of Sector 7, the part of the city that had seen more action than the rest. A few steps further, and they'd be in the rumored Armory, a place that had been the subject of every drunken whisper in the few taverns that still leaked light into the darkness. You ever wonder what it would be like to be one of those first explorers? Cadden asked, trying to keep his mind off the oppressive atmosphere. Nah, Leora replied, flicking a glance his way. They all ended up dead or crazy or both, but I suppose that's one way to get famous, Cadden chuckled. Always a silver lining, huh? More like tarnished silver, but hey, it's still silver, she shrugged, her eyes fixed ahead. They stopped at a door that was more dent than metal. Cadden gave it a tentative push, and it squealed like a cat on a hot tin roof. Leora winced. Subtle, she said. If anyone's home, they know we're here now. Maybe they left the kettle on, Cadden suggested, pressing on into the dark. With our luck, it's the bomb instead of the kettle, Leora sighed, but followed him anyway. The room they entered was a testament to neglect. Once it might have been a control center, a bustling hive of lights and activity. Now it was just another graveyard of forgotten tech. Consoles sat silent and uncaring like judges presiding over a court of rust. At the far end loomed a sealed door, sturdier than the rest. That's gotta be it, Cadden said, his voice tinged with awe. The Armory. Or a broom closet, Leora said. With our luck, I'd bet on the latter. Only one way to find out, Cadden replied, already setting to work on the lock. Leora stood back, arms folded. She wasn't one to get excited over ancient relics, especially those that might still have a bite. You ever think that maybe they left this stuff for a reason? She asked. What, like a cosmic Easter egg? Cadden laughed. Maybe the aliens were just bored. Or maybe they saw what we did with the last batch of tech we found and decided we weren't the sharing type, Leora countered. Cadden paused, giving her a sidelong glance. You always this cheery about potential doom, or is today special? Oh, I'm just a ray of sunshine, she said, not even a hint of a smile crossing her face. The lock gave way with a reluctant click, and the door slid open with a groan that set Cadden's teeth on edge. Inside, rows upon rows of alien devices lay dormant, their purpose as inscrutable as their makers. Light from their flashlights danced across sleek, metallic surfaces that seemed to drink in the illumination and give nothing back. Well, Cadden said, stepping inside. I'd say we hit the jackpot. Or we've just found the world's worst toy store, Leora muttered. Look at this, Cadden said, picking up a device that looked like a gun, if guns were designed by committee and made to be anything but recognizable. I wonder what it does. Probably make your head explode, Leora said. I'd put it down if I were you. You worry too much, Cadden said, examining the device with childlike curiosity. Define too much when dealing with ancient alien tech, Leora shot back, her gaze sweeping the room. Come on, Leora, when's the last time you had a little fun with potentially lethal artifacts? Cadden grinned, raising an eyebrow. Last Tuesday, she deadpanned. Didn't end well. Cadden chuckled, placing the device back on its shelf. Party pooper. Realist, Leora corrected. And besides, this stuff doesn't look like it was left for a good purpose. Good thing we're not exactly the poster children for good purposes, Cadden said, pulling at another item with a casual indifference that belied the danger. The room was quiet, but not the peaceful kind. It was the silence before a storm, the kind that makes you wish you'd stayed in bed that morning. So what now? Leora asked, her voice layered with a mix of skepticism and a begrudging interest. We tell the others. Let them in on our little secret, Cadden pondered, scratching his chin. Or keep it quiet and see if we can figure any of this out on our own. Right, because we're qualified for that, Leora scoffed. You got a degree in alien tech stashed somewhere, or are we just winging it? Oh, we're winging it, Cadden said, eyes twinkling with mischief. Isn't that when things get interesting? Interesting as in explosive interesting, Leora asked, half serious. Hopefully not, Cadden replied, though the gleam in his eye suggested he wasn't entirely opposed to a little chaos. Yeah, well, just remember curiosity killed the cat, Leora said, crossing her arms. And satisfaction brought it back, Cadden countered, a smug grin on his face. She shook her head, a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. You're impossible, she said. That's why you love me, he replied, stashing away a small device in his pack. Love's a strong word, she said, watching him with a wary affection. Tolerate, maybe. I'll take it, Cadden said, turning to leave the room behind. Hey, if we do blow ourselves up, at least we'll go out with a bang, right? Always looking on the bright side, Leora said, following him out into the dim corridor. Someone's got to, Cadden replied. Otherwise, what's the point? The door slid shut behind them, the alien armory once again entombed in silence. For now, the secrets within lay dormant, but the spark of discovery had been lit, and there was no turning back. Not that they ever turned back. Not when there was a whole world, or what was left of it, to explore and exploit. So, Leora said, breaking the silence as they made their way back through the maze-like structure, you really think there's something worth finding here? I think there's always something worth finding, Cadden said, his voice thoughtful now. It's just a matter of whether it's gonna save us or kill us. Some choice, Leora said, shaking her head. Aren't they all? Cadden grinned, the kind of grin that made Leora both exasperated and amused in equal measure. You know, she said slowly, one day that attitude's gonna get you killed. Probably, he admitted, but at least I won't die of boredom. Amen to that, she said, as they stepped over the threshold into the next chapter of their misadventure. Who knew what awaited them in the shattered remains of the satellite Metropolis? Whatever it was, they were in it together for better or worse, and knowing their luck probably worse. But wasn't that half the fun? Well, at least for Cadden. Leora wasn't so sure yet, but she'd stick around to find out. After all, someone had to be there to say, I told you so, when things inevitably went sideways. And if they didn't, well, she'd cross that bridge when she got to it. Maybe even burn it for good measure. Leora leaned against the wall of the corridor, watching Cadden fiddle with one of the alien devices they'd just scavenged. It looked like a weapon, which meant it probably was, especially given the alien's penchant for turning household items into instruments of mass destruction. You're really gonna try that here? Leora asked, eyebrow raised. Because I was actually planning on living through the day. Cadden shrugged, still fascinated by the device. What's the point of finding an alien weapon if we don't see what it does? Besides, this place is half a light bulb away from total collapse anyway. True, she said, but I'd rather not be the one with the match that sets it all off. He grinned, weighing the device in his hands. Think of it as an experiment. You're not a scientist, Cadden. You're a scavenger with a death wish. And you're my lovely assistant, he shot back, winking. Besides, I have a gut feeling about this one. Right, she said dryly. Because your gut's always so accurate, like that time it told you eating that glowing fruit was safe. It did smell like raspberries, Cadden muttered defensively, But Leora had already turned her back on pointing out his past mishaps. She was scanning the corridor for any signs of life. The air felt tenser than usual, like the universe had taken a rare breath and was holding it. Just make it quick. I have a bad feeling. You and your feelings, Cadden teased, but he was already aiming the thing, adjusting its settings with the care of a blind man defusing a bomb. Okay, here goes nothing, he said, and pressed a trigger that might have been a trigger if you squinted and hoped really hard. The device hummed, then fizzled, emitting a bizarre sound somewhere between a cat's purr and a blender's death rattle. For a moment, nothing happened, which was somehow worse than immediate catastrophe. Well, that was anticlimactic, Leora said. Suddenly, a pulse of light shot from the weapon, ricocheting off the walls with a series of loud clangs before disappearing down the corridor. Cadden and Leora stood frozen, caught between awe and terror. "Did you see that?" Cadden exclaimed, looking like a kid who'd just discovered that candy actually grows on trees. "Yeah, I saw our deaths flashing before my eyes," Leora replied, half impressed, half terrified. "What the hell was that?" "Don't know," Cadden said, eyes still on the device. "But it was awesome." "Awesome's not the word I'd use," she muttered, shaking her head. "More like suicidal." Before they could debate further, the sound of distant shouts and heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Leora shot Cadden a glare. "What did you do?" Cadden shrugged. "I may have set off a silent alarm," Leora sighed. "Silent alarms don't make sounds, genius." "But whatever you did, it got attention." As they prepared to make a hasty retreat, a band of armed figures emerged from the shadows, led by a man with a face like a rock slide and the personality to match. Merrick, a name that sent shivers down the spine of anyone who valued their limbs. "Well, well," Merrick said, his voice as rough as sandpaper. "Look what we have here." "Two little rats who found a big piece of cheese." "I prefer artisans of opportunity," Cadden replied, feigning nonchalance. "Rats have such negative connotations." "Cut the crap," Merrick snapped, eyes flicking to the alien device in Cadden's hand. "You found the armory, didn't you?" "Armory's a strong word," Leora interjected. "More like a really weird garage sale." Merrick's scowl deepened, his gaze like a vise. "Hand it over." "And why would we do that?" Cadden asked, cocking his head. "We found it fair and square." Merrick chuckled, a sound that held as much humor as a funeral march. "Because if you don't, I'll make sure you leave here in pieces small enough to mail." "Tempting," Cadden said, "but I'm gonna pass. I'm rather attached to my current arrangement of limbs." "Yeah, it's worked for him so far," Leora added, arms crossed. Merrick's men shifted, their weapons raised just enough to emphasize his point. Cadden's grip on the alien device tightened. For a moment the air seemed to hold its breath. "Listen," Leora said, stepping forward slightly, "this isn't worth starting a war over." Merrick's gaze was unyielding. "You're right. It's worth ending one." "Aw, Merrick, I didn't know you cared," Cadden said. "But seriously, this place is a death trap. Bringing more people into this is just, well, stupid." "You just want the treasure for yourself," Merrick accused, narrowing his eyes. "Treasure?" Leora repeated. "More like a high-risk clearance sale. Look around, Merrick, this place isn't going anywhere. If we all start shooting, we're all just going to be space dust. And I don't know about you, but I like my atoms where they are." "Smart mouth," Merrick muttered, "but not smart enough to keep you alive." Leora exchanged a glance with Cadden, weighing their options. They could hand over the device, but that would leave them with nothing, and Merrick wasn't exactly known for keeping promises. "We could just leave," Cadden suggested, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "No need for anyone to get hurt." Merrick considered this, his jaw working like he was chewing a particularly tough piece of meat. Then he smirked, a cruel twist of his lips. "Fine," he said, "but this isn't over. You got a head start, but I'll be right on your heels. And when I catch up," he leaned in, eyes dark as a black hole, "I'll make sure you regret ever setting foot in here." "Promises, promises," Cadden said with a wink, backing up slowly. "Try not to get hit by the door on your way out," Leora added, mirroring his retreat. They turned and sprinted down the corridor, Merrick's voice following them like a curse. "Run while you can, scavengers." I'll find you, and when I do, you'll wish you'd never been born. Leora and Cadden raced through the winding halls, adrenaline pumping through their veins. The walls seemed to blur past them, just another chaotic backdrop to their frantic escape. You think you'll actually track us down? Leora asked, breathless. Probably, Cadden replied, skidding around a corner. But we've always been good at playing hard to get. Yeah, because everyone loves a game of cat and mouse where the mouse is armed with alien tech. Exactly, Cadden said, grinning despite the situation. Who doesn't love an underdog story? Behind them, the echoes of Merrick's pursuit grew fainter, but the threat lingered in the air like a bad smell. They were in deep now, and the only way out was forward. Rounding another corner, they stumbled into a narrow passage lined with haphazardly stacked crates and twisted metal. A dead end. Perfect. Crap, Leora hissed. Now what? Cadden examined the area, eyes darting around like a squirt on caffeine. We improvise. Improvise? Now's not really the time for creativity, Cadden. There's always time for creativity, he replied, already rifling through the nearest crate. Or at least there's time for panic-driven ingenuity. Leora kept watch, her nerves a frayed live wire. Just make it quick. Cadden pulled out an old, battered piece of equipment, grinning like a madman. Found a signal jammer. Great, Leora said, because the last thing we need is them calling in reinforcements. Exactly, Cadden said, flipping switches and turning dials with the deftness of someone who'd spent far too much time messing with things he shouldn't. Let's see if this old girl's still got it. The device buzzed to life, emitting a low-frequency hum that reverberated through the cramped space. Cadden nodded, satisfied. That should buy us some time. Leora sighed, leaning against the wall. Time for what, exactly? Cadden looked at her, eyes glinting with mischief. To plan our next move. We're sitting on a treasure trove of alien tech. We just need to figure out how to use it, against Merrick, or anyone else who decides they want to play king of the scrapyard. Leora considered him, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt. There was none. Despite the chaos, despite the danger, he was in his element, thriving. You're insane, she said, shaking her head. Probably, Cadden agreed, but you gotta admit, life would be pretty boring otherwise. Leora chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Yeah, I guess so. They shared a moment of camaraderie, a silent understanding that they'd face whatever came next together. No plan, no guarantees, just the thrill of the unknown and the promise of adventure. So, Cadden said, what's next on the agenda? Leora shrugged, glancing back the way they came. I guess we wait for the dust to settle, then figure out how to take Merrick down a peg. Or 10, Cadden said, smirking. Right, she agreed. He could use a little humility, and maybe a new hobby. Like knitting. Exactly, Cadden said, eyes bright with possibility. Can't imagine him stabbing anyone with a pair of knitting needles, Leora snorted. He'd probably find a way. Yeah, Cadden conceded. But hopefully not before we figure out how to beat him at his own game. A thoughtful silence settled over them, punctuated by the distant creaks and groans of the derelict structure surrounding them. They were in deep, but they were in it together. So, Cadden, she said after a moment, how do you feel about playing hero? He laughed, a sound full of bravado and reckless optimism. Never been much for capes, but I guess I could give it a try. Good, Leora said, feeling the weight of their predicament lift just a little. Because we're gonna need all the heroics we can get. With that, they turned their attention back to the alien device in Cadden's hand, wondering what secrets it held and how those secrets might change everything. Whatever happened next, they'd be ready, come Merrick or high water. In the satellite Metropolis, where chaos reigned supreme and luck was as rare as a sober bartender, they knew one thing for certain: they weren't going down without a fight. The corridor felt like a suffocating, metal-walled nightmare when Cadden and Leora weren't sprinting through it. Now, it was just an endless blur of rust and shadows. Leora cast a glance over her shoulder, half expecting Merrick and his goons to come barreling around the corner, baying for blood. But all she saw was the same cracked bulkheads and discarded debris as before. Think we lost them? Leora asked, her voice barely above a whisper, not wanting to jinx their slim margin of safety. Lost them. Please, Merrick's as persistent as a hangover after a drinking contest, Cadden puffed, slowing his pace to a brisk jog. He'll be back, probably with more friends and less patience. Great, Leora said, rolling her eyes. Just what we need. A bigger audience for our potential dismemberment. It's all about the ratings, Cadden replied, cracking a grin. But seriously, we've got to find somewhere to regroup. I don't fancy our chances just standing here waiting for Merrick to catch up. As if on cue, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the narrow passageway. Their hearts skipped a beat until the figures emerged, not from the direction of Merrick's crew, but from the shadows ahead. This new squad sported a motley armor collection that looked cobbled together from various fashion disasters. Their leader was a woman with a sleek, calculating expression and eyes like chips of ice. Her name was Zexa, and she was known as the strategist who'd rather win a game than play a fair one. Ah, the infamous scavengers, Zexa said, her voice smooth like a well-oiled lie. I heard you were causing a bit of a stir in Sector 7. I had to come see for myself. Cadden and Leora exchanged a glance. Guess we're the most popular kids in school, Cadden quipped. Too bad popularity doesn't come with an escape plan. Zexa's lips curled into a smile that could freeze fire. No need to escape just yet. We're all friends here, at least until we're not. We're about as friendly as a nest of vipers, Leora shot back, crossing her arms. What do you want? Zexa pretended to ponder the question, tapping her chin theatrically. Oh, let's start with not getting shot by Merrick's lot, shall we? And maybe, just maybe, finding whatever interesting trinkets you dug up in that alien garage sale. You mean the Armory, Cadden corrected, unable to resist poking the bear. But sure, let's call it a garage sale if it makes you feel better. Semantics, Zexa said with a dismissive wave. The point is, you two are in over your heads and Merrick's about to sink you anyway. Join me and perhaps we can all leave here with our skins intact. Sounds like a great deal, Cadden said, sarcasm dripping from every word. But what's in it for you besides the pleasure of our company? Well, scavenger, Zexa's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Besides the obvious thrill of making Merrick's life a misery, there's the allure of resources, technology, power, things that come in handy when you're playing the game of conquest. And here I thought you just wanted a dance partner, Leora interjected. But listen, if teaming up with us means screwing over Merrick, then count us in. Zexa's gaze turned sharper, calculating possibilities and risks faster than a gambler on a losing streak. Wise choice. Now let's discuss how we can turn this little three-way standoff into something more profitable for us and less fatal. Cadden nodded. We're all ears, Zexa. Just remember, we're not interested in being pawns in a game we didn't sign up for. You've got my word, Zexa said, though her word was about as reliable as a politician's promise. We'll need to draw Merrick out, get him distracted long enough for us to slip by. Easy, Leora said with mock cheerfulness. Let's just throw a party. Nothing distracts like free booze and bad music, Zexa chuckled, a sound like knives clinking together. I like the way you think, though I doubt Merrick's a party kind of guy. More of a crash-it with explosives type. Well, we've got this, Cadden said, holding up the alien device. Still not sure exactly what it does, but I'm willing to bet it can cause a scene. Perfect, Zexa said, her eyes lighting up with a gleam of mischief. Let's give Merrick a show he won't forget. They spent the next few minutes huddled over the device, concocting plans and backups. It was a delicate dance of deceit and strategy, the kind where one misstep meant game over. All the while, the distant sounds of Merrick's crew closing in served as a grim reminder of the stakes. Think this'll work? Leora asked as they reached the final stages of their plan. Not a clue, Cadden admitted, shrugging. But if it doesn't, at least we'll have a hell of a light show to go out on. Zexa snorted, spoken like a true optimist. But let's not plan our funerals just yet. The plan was simple. They'd lure Merrick's men into a bottleneck, use the alien device to blind and confuse them, and slip away in the chaos. Zexa's crew would cover their retreat, buying them enough time to make a break for it. "That's the signal," Cadden said, hearing the prearranged clatter of metal on metal that meant Zexa's crew had engaged Merrick. "Time to see if this thing can really shine." He activated the alien device, which pulsed dramatically, casting an eerie, flickering glow that filled the corridor. "Would be a hell of a party trick," Zexa remarked, shielding her eyes against the light. "It's not polite to stare," Leora added, watching as Merrick's men stumbled, momentarily blinded by the device's brilliance. "Let's go," Cadden urged, leading the retreat as Merrick's curses echoed in the chaos behind them. As they slipped through the shadows, Zexa barked orders to her crew, ensuring their escape route remained clear. The plan was working, until it wasn't. Merrick, somehow recovering faster than anticipated, yelled for his crew to press forward, and suddenly the corridor was alive with gunfire and shouting. The walls reverberated with the noise, amplifying the chaos into a symphony of destruction. "Time for Plan B," Zexa called, her voice barely audible over the din. "Fall back, Plan B," Cadden asked, ducking to avoid a spray of bullets. "I thought this was Plan B." "Then it's Plan C," Zexa snapped back, her patience wearing thin. They navigated the labyrinthine passageways, trusting Zexa's instinct for survival as Merrick's forces pursued them relentlessly. The sound of footsteps and shouted orders drew closer, a relentless tide of hostility threatening to swallow them whole. "You sure you know where we're going?" Leora asked, breathless. "Of course," Zexa replied, though her confidence seemed more like bravado than certainty. "I always know." It was a bold claim, and one that Cadden hoped wasn't about to unravel spectacularly. They reached a juncture, and Zexa led them into a narrower passageway, one barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. "This way," she insisted, gesturing them forward. "Thought you liked wide open spaces," Cadden quipped, though his heart hammered in his chest like a wild thing. "Less room for them to maneuver," Zexa said, eyes scanning for any sign of pursuit. "Trust me." Trust was a scarce commodity in their line of work, but they had little choice. They followed her lead, ducking through the tight confines until they emerged into a larger chamber, cluttered with decrepit machinery and the detritus of past inhabitants. "Home sweet home," Cadden muttered, eyeing the rust-streaked walls and the jagged edges of broken equipment. "At least we've got a roof over our heads." "For now," Leora said, eyeing the entrances with suspicion. "Not exactly a fortress." Zexa nodded, acknowledging the truth of Leora's assessment. "We'll hold them here. At least long enough to regroup and figure out our next move." "Assuming we live long enough to have a next move," Cadden said, though there was a gleam of determination in his eyes. "We will," Zexa replied with a confidence that belied their precarious situation. "We have to." As they prepared to make their stand, Cadden turned the alien device over in his hands, its weight a tangible reminder of the stakes they faced. Whatever happened next, they were in this together, playing a dangerous game where the only prize was survival. "You ready for this?" Cadden asked Leora, who nodded, steeling herself for the fight to come. "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, her voice steady despite the tension thrumming through the air. "Then let's give Merrick and his merry band of idiots something to remember us by," Cadden said, a fierce grin spreading across his face. "Agreed," Zexa said, her own expression mirroring Cadden's defiance. "And if we're lucky, we might just live to see another day." With that, they turned to face the approaching threat, united in their resolve to fight for their place in the grim, unforgiving world they called home. The battle was far from over, but as long as they stood together, hope remained, a flickering beacon against the encroaching darkness. The satellite Metropolis, a decrepit playground of rust and regret, decided it wasn't done playing games with Cadden and his merry band of misfits. Just as the echoes of Merrick's goons started sounding like a bad techno remix, the ground rumbled beneath their feet. "Great, just what we needed," Leora muttered, pulling a face that suggested she'd rather be anywhere but here. "An actual reason for this place to fall apart." "Earthquakes," Cadden said, like he was swearing under his breath. "Who thought it'd be a good idea to build on a moon that quakes?" Probably the same genius who thought using alien tech as party favors was a solid plan, Zexa retorted, eyes scanning the ceiling like it might come crashing down at any moment. As if on cue, a chunk of metal decided to quit its day job as a ceiling panel and came plummeting down. They scattered, just narrowly avoiding being made into human pancakes. "Well, that's one problem solved," Cadden said, brushing dust off his jacket. "We don't need to worry about Merrick if we're buried alive." Zexa's lips twitched, the closest she'd probably ever get to a smile. "Always the optimist, aren't you? Just a realist with a flair for sarcasm," Cadden shot back. "What's the plan now, strategist?" Zexa glanced at the alien device, its glow casting eerie shadows. "We might have to rethink our escape. If this place collapses, we're going to need an exit strategy fast." "No kidding," Leora said, her voice carrying a sharp edge. "I'm not interested in being a permanent part of the decor." They regrouped, casting wary glances at the groaning walls and ceiling. The quakes were intermittent, like the whole structure was having a temper tantrum. Each rumble felt like a countdown to disaster. "Okay, let's find somewhere this place isn't likely to squish us flat," Zexa suggested, leading them through the labyrinth of corridors. As they moved, Cadden couldn't help but notice how the once bustling Metropolis felt like a ghost town now, save for the occasional ominous creak. "Anyone else feel like we're the last rats on this sinking ship?" "More like the smartest," Zexa corrected, the conviction in her voice almost convincing. They pressed on, the threat of Merrick overshadowed by the more immediate danger of becoming debris. It was like being caught between a rock and a hard place if the rock was actively trying to crush you. "Maybe we should send Merrick a thank you note," Leora quipped. "Tell him to take 5 while the moon finishes us off." "Think he'd accept an IOU?" Cadden asked, glancing back at the way they'd come. "Only if it's written in blood," Zexa remarked, her tone dry as a desert. They reached a section that seemed relatively stable, a large chamber, once a central hub of commerce, now a graveyard of ambitions. Dust floated in the air, highlighted by shafts of flickering light from the alien orb. "This'll do," Zexa declared, looking around with a critical eye. "At least until we figure out how to avoid becoming space dust." Cadden leaned against a rusting piece of machinery, the alien device clutched in his hand. "You think this thing has more tricks up its sleeve?" he asked, hoping for a miracle wrapped in sarcasm. "If it doesn't, we might have to improvise," Leora said, eyeing the device like it was a particularly recalcitrant puzzle box. The alien weapon, or whatever it was, felt oddly comforting in Cadden's grip. He turned it over, noticing for the first time a series of symbols etched into its surface, previously hidden by grime and neglect. "Hey, look at this," he said, showing the markings to the others. Zexa squinted at the symbols. "Great alien hieroglyphics. Just what we needed to decode in our spare time. Maybe it's the alien version of insert batteries here," Leora joked, though she didn't sound entirely unserious. Cadden ran a finger over the markings, trying to make sense of them. "Feels like it might be important," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Important or not, we need to figure it out fast," Zexa said, her tone brooking no argument. "Before this place becomes our tomb." Another rumble, more insistent this time, sent dust cascading from above. The three of them exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They needed a plan, and they needed it yesterday. "All right, let's play a little game of what the hell does this do," Cadden said, setting the device on the ground. Zexa crouched beside him. "You're not thinking of poking it until something happens, are you?" "Pretty much," Cadden replied. "Unless you've got a manual hidden somewhere," the strategist shook her head. "No manual, but I've got intuition. Let's hope it's enough." With cautious fingers, Cadden pressed one of the symbols. The device hummed to life, a low vibration that thrummed through the floor. "That can't be good," Leora said, taking a step back. The device projected a holographic interface, shimmering in the air like a mirage. Lines of alien script scrolled across the display, indecipherable yet oddly mesmerizing. "Now we're talking," Cadden said, more to himself. "Or we're about to trigger the self-destruct," Leora added, ever the pessimist. Zexa leaned closer, studying the display. Wait, this could be it. If we can figure out how to use this thing, we might just have a shot. A shot at what? Cadden asked, raising an eyebrow. Survival, Zexa said simply. And maybe taking Merrick down a peg while we're at it. Sounds like my kind of party, Leora said, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of hope. They experimented with the interface, trying various combinations of symbols. Each attempt yielded different results, from harmless light shows to worrying vibrations. Think we could harness this thing, maybe turn it against Merrick, Cadden speculated, half joking. It's worth a try, Zexa said, her eyes alight with a schemer's focus. If we can figure out how to control it, we might just have a chance. And if we can't? Leora asked, not quite able to keep the apprehension from her voice. Then we find another way, Cadden replied, a hard edge to his tone. Because I'm not going down without a fight. As they continued to work, the quakes became less frequent, as if the moon itself was holding its breath. It was a temporary reprieve, but they'd take it. Feels like we're living on borrowed time, Leora said, her hands busy with the device's interface. Aren't we always? Cadden replied, his grin hard-pressed to be called reassuring. An unexpected jolt from the device made them all jump, the holographic display shifting to reveal a more complex set of symbols. Looks promising, Zexa said, and there was a hint of excitement in her voice now, a gambler's thrill at the possibility of outplaying the odds. Cadden manipulated the symbols, a pattern emerging that seemed to resonate with the device. What do you think this does? He asked, a dangerous curiosity sparking in his eyes. Only one way to find out, Zexa said, nodding for him to proceed. With a steady hand, Cadden completed the sequence. The device emitted a low, thrumming pulse, the air around it vibrating with potential energy. Now that's a light show, Leora said, shielding her eyes against the sudden flare of brightness. The pulse traveled through the structure, a ripple effect that seemed to stabilize the surrounding area, albeit temporarily. For a moment, the quakes halted entirely, the silence almost as deafening as the earlier chaos. Guess we bought ourselves a little more time, Zexa said, a rare note of satisfaction in her voice. Or maybe we just pissed something off, Cadden countered, though he allowed himself a small measure of relief. They exchanged looks, a silent understanding passing between them. This was far from over, but just maybe they'd stumbled upon an edge, a potential turning point in their favor. We're gonna need Merrick to back off if we want to figure this out, Zexa said, her mind already racing ahead. And how do we pull that off? Leora asked, skepticism evident. Negotiation, Cadden suggested with a wry grin, or whatever the grimdark version of that is. Temporary truce, Zexa corrected, her tone leaving no room for doubt. We convince him that if this place goes belly up, he's just as dead as we are. Cadden nodded, seeing the sense in it. All right, let's go extend an olive branch. Maybe one with a grenade attached. They moved out, the alien device tucked securely under Cadden's arm. The tremors had abated for now, but the threat lingered, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. As they approached Merrick's territory, the air grew tense, the silence heavy with anticipation. Think he'll listen? Leora asked, doubt lacing her words. He'll listen, Zexa said, her voice hard as steel. Because if he doesn't, we're all screwed. Cadden just laughed, the sound echoing in the still air. Guess it's time to make a new friend. They approached cautiously, aware of the eyes watching from the shadows, fingers itching to pull triggers. Merrick's men were on edge, the impending disaster clear in their eyes, but they held their fire as Zexa led the way. Nothing like a little apocalypse to bring people together, Cadden muttered, his gaze fixed on the figures ahead. Merrick himself emerged from the gloom, his expression a mix of frustration and curiosity. You've got some nerve waltzing in here, he said, voice like gravel. We've got a proposition, Zexa cut in, her tone brokered for business, not bullshit. Merrick eyed them with suspicion, arms crossed. I'm listening. We stabilize this place, Zexa stated, holding Merrick's gaze. But we need a ceasefire, at least until we know we're not going down with the ship. And why would I trust you? Merrick asked, his tone flat but interested. Cadden stepped forward, hefting the alien device. "Because we've got this," he said. "And right now it's about the only thing keeping us above ground." Merrick's eyes flicked to the device, recognition and greed warring in his gaze. "All right," he said slowly. "But make no mistake, the second this is over, we're back to business as usual." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Cadden replied, a sardonic grin pulling at his lips. With an uneasy truce in place, they turned back to the task at hand, Merrick's men watching their every move. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was a start, and sometimes a start was all you needed, especially when the world around you was falling apart at the seams. The uneasy truce with Merrick was like a cheap spacesuit. Eventually, it was going to get you killed, but it might just keep you alive long enough to regret it. Cadden knew this as he and Zexa worked under the watchful eyes of Merrick's goons. Leora, meanwhile, had wandered off to scout, or maybe just to find a corner where she could curse their luck without an audience. "Think they'll stab us in the back?" Zexa asked, her voice low, eyes flicking to one of Merrick's men who was picking his teeth with the deadliest-looking knife she'd ever seen. "Of course," Cadden replied. But not until after Happy Ior. Their focus shifted back to the alien device, a mix of buttons and lights that might as well have been a cosmic Rubik's Cube. It was their lifeline, their trump card, and probably the thing that'd blow up in their faces. Merrick loomed over them, all swagger and menace. "You working it out or just playing with it?" His voice was a deep growl, the kind that grated on nerves like sandpaper on skin. Zexa gave him a smile that was about as warm as a laser pistol. "Just working out how to keep us all breathing." Merrick leaned closer, his breath a toxic cloud of cigar smoke and bad intentions. "Better work fast." "Patience ain't my strong suit." Cadden shrugged, gesturing towards the device. "Hey, you want to try your luck? Be my guest. But if you screw it up, we all get to enjoy a nice, quick vaporization." Merrick sneered but backed off, clearly not keen on the prospect of being space dust. He retreated to confer with his men, leaving Cadden and Zexa to their work. "Charming fellow, isn't he?" Zexa muttered, her fingers deftly manipulating the holographic controls. "Makes me nostalgic for good old-fashioned homicidal maniacs," Cadden replied. At least some of them had the decency to be upfront about it. As they continued, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut, and there was that gnawing feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. Experience had taught them that feeling was rarely wrong. Just as Zexa seemed to be making progress, a commotion erupted towards the makeshift armory in Sector 7. Merrick and his men, ever the paranoid bunch, reacted instantly, weapons at the ready. "Stay here," Merrick ordered, and before Cadden could offer a sarcastic retort, the man was gone, leading his goons to investigate the disturbance. Cadden and Zexa exchanged a glance. "Think it's the cavalry, or are we just that lucky?" Cadden asked. "Luck isn't our forte, remember," Zexa replied, adjusting her stance to get a better view of the corridor leading to the armory. The sounds of a scuffle, shouting, and the distinctive sizzle of energy weapons echoed back to them. It was chaos, a riot of violence and noise that suggested either a full-scale attack or the world's worst party. Leora appeared, breathless and wide-eyed. "Trouble," she gasped, understating the obvious with such flair it almost felt like a joke. "Define trouble," Cadden said, already expecting the worst. "Merrick double-crossed us," she spat, her voice tight with anger. "He's grabbing everything he can from the armory. He's got more guys than we thought, hidden reserves." "Well, isn't that just the cherry on our disaster sundae?" Cadden muttered. "How much time do we have?" "Enough to get screwed over, not much else," Leora replied, trying to catch her breath. Zexa swore under her breath, something unrepeatable that described Merrick's lineage with colorful creativity. "We need a new plan." Before they could concoct said plan, Merrick returned. His eyes were wild, the look of a man with all the cards and none of the sense. Behind him, his men dragged Leora away, pinning her arms behind her back with grim efficiency. "Hey," Cadden shouted, stepping forward instinctively. "What's the big idea?" Merrick's grin was wolfish. "Insurance policy. You try anything stupid and she pays for it." Cadden's mind raced, 1,000 plans and none of them good. We had a deal, Merrick. Yeah, well, I'm renegotiating. That's what makes me such a savvy businessman, Merrick replied, his tone dripping with smug satisfaction. Zexa stepped forward, her voice dangerously calm. You're playing a risky game, Merrick. This place goes up, you're just as dead as we are. Merrick chuckled, a sound that was anything but merry. Yeah, but I plan to leave before that happens. Thanks to you, I've got the means. Cadden's heart sank as he realized the truth. Merrick had played them perfectly. He had the device, the armory, and now Leora. They'd been outmaneuvered, and it stung worse than a blaster burn. Enjoy your head start, Cadden said, his voice hollow with defeat. But remember, karma's a bitch with a long memory. Merrick just waved him off, directing his men to secure Leora and prepare for departure. Cadden and Zexa were left standing in the corridor, the enormity of their failure weighing heavily on their shoulders. Now what? Zexa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cadden didn't have an answer. For the first time he felt truly beaten, the weight of their situation pressing down like a gravity well. They'd gambled and lost, and now the consequences were staring them in the face with a smug grin. We regroup, Cadden said finally, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. We figure out another way because rolling over isn't in my playbook, and if it doesn't work, Zexa asked, her eyes locked on his. Then we go down swinging, Cadden replied, a grim determination settling over him like a second skin. Zexa nodded, a flicker of hope rekindling in her eyes. We've been in tighter spots, she said, though they both knew it was a lie. They watched as Merrick's men moved out, Leora in tow. The bastard even had the audacity to wave, as if they were old friends parting ways after a pleasant dinner. You think she'll be okay? Zexa asked, her voice laced with concern. Cadden didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the retreating figures, anger simmering just below the surface. She's tough, probably tougher than either of us. But we don't leave her at his mercy. They turned back to the device, the one card they had left to play. The symbols on its surface mocked them, an unsolved riddle with stakes too high to ignore. If we can figure this out, maybe we can still turn this around, Cadden said, though the words felt hollow. Zexa didn't reply, her focus on the task at hand. The device was their last hope, a lifeline in an ocean of despair, and they'd have to make it work or die trying. Think of it this way, Zexa said, a ghost of a smile on her lips. At least it can't get any worse. Cadden shot her a look that was half amusement, half exasperation. You just had to say it, didn't you? The ground beneath them shuddered with a low rumble, as if the moon itself was laughing at their plight. Dust fell from the ceiling, a gentle reminder that their borrowed time was running out. See, it's always worse, Cadden muttered, turning his attention back to the device. Let's crack this damn thing before Merrick gets too comfortable. Zexa nodded, her fingers resuming their dance over the holographic interface. The alien symbols shimmered under her touch, a tantalizing promise of salvation or doom. The minutes stretched into eternity, each second a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. Cadden could feel the pressure, a vice tightening around his chest, but he forced himself to focus. They worked in silence, the only sounds the hum of the device and the distant echoes of Merrick's men moving through the corridors. It was a race against time, a desperate gamble with everything on the line. Finally, the device emitted a low beep, the holographic display shifting to reveal a new configuration. Zexa's eyes widened in surprise and hope. I think I've got it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile possibility of success. Cadden leaned over her shoulder, studying the display. A pattern emerged, one that seemed to resonate with the device, a rhythm that promised power and control. Let's see what this baby can do, Cadden said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. With a steady hand, Zexa completed the sequence, and the device responded with a low, thrumming pulse. The air around them vibrated with energy, a promise of potential unleashed. For a moment, hope flickered to life, a fragile, wavering flame in the darkness. But in the back of Cadden's mind, a darker thought lingered, a reminder that nothing good ever came without a cost. They watched as the pulse radiated outward, stabilizing the surrounding area, a temporary reprieve from the chaos threatening to consume them. Cadden and Zexa exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of their shared determination. They'd been dealt a bad hand, but they weren't out of the game yet. Not by a long shot. "Let's go get our girl back," Cadden said, his voice firm with resolve. "After you," Zexa replied, a smirk tugging at her lips. Together they moved into the shadows, their next move uncertain but their resolve unyielding. The odds were stacked against them, the deck rigged and the table tilted, but they had one advantage Merrick hadn't counted on: their refusal to give up. In the grimdark landscape of their reality, hope was a fragile thing, but sometimes it was enough to light the way through the darkest of hours. Cadden paced like a caged animal, eyes flicking between the alien device and the corridor, which seemed ready to collapse on him like the universe's worst surprise party. The fact the device had done something, and not exploded in their faces, was a small victory. The problem was, small victories in this place were about as useful as a parachute in a vacuum. "So, what's the plan, genius?" Zexa asked, leaning against the cold metal wall. Her attempt at looking nonchalant was betrayed by the way she kept glancing toward the armory, as if expecting Merrick to burst back in with a big surprise. "You're screwed." "Plan?" "Oh, you mean the thing I definitely have and am totally not making up as we go along," Cadden shot back, trying to think faster than his mouth moved. "We use this thing to make Merrick's day worse than ours. He's holding all the cards, so we need to flip the table." Zexa smirked. "Flipping tables usually gets you thrown out of bars, not out of intergalactic hostage situations. But it's a start." Cadden watched the alien device hum in a low, comforting thrum that promised mischief. "We've got this thing. We just need to figure out how to play angry gods with it." "And Leora?" Zexa asked, her voice dipping to a serious note that didn't suit the atmosphere of everything's about to explode. "We get her back. She's too good at swearing to let Merrick keep her." Cadden turned his attention to the alien device again. It was their escape hatch, their ace in the hole, or their bomb. Hard to tell without a manual. But whatever it was better than nothing. And nothing was all they had before. The corridors around them moaned like an old man getting up from a long nap, making Cadden wonder if the moon had decided to let them know it was just as fed up with this situation as they were. Dust trickled down like the world's worst confetti. Zexa nudged him with her elbow. "So how do we make this thing weaponized confusion?" He grinned, an idea striking him like a bolt out of the blue, one of those rare occurrences that was either sheer genius or suicidal stupidity. "Merrick thinks he's got a handle on things. Let's make him handle more than he bargained for." "That sounds delightfully vague." "Thank you, I work hard at it. But seriously, if we can turn this into a signal disruptor, scramble Merrick's toys, make his goons about as useful as a solar panel in a cave." Zexa raised an eyebrow. "You think this thing can do that?" Cadden shrugged, trying to exude a confidence he didn't quite feel. "Why not? If aliens can turn a toaster into a death ray, I'm sure this thing can manage a bit of chaos." The plan was simple, bordering on idiotic, which in their experience was the sweet spot. They'd use the alien device to jam Merrick's comms and weapon systems. If they could blind him, they'd buy themselves enough time to make a move, or a graceful retreat. Either option seemed better than standing here waiting for Merrick to come back. Zexa set to work on the device, her fingers deftly manipulating the controls like she'd been born with alien tech in her cradle. The hum changed pitch, a subtle melody of menace and promise. She muttered under her breath, a litany of curses mixed with prayers to any deity that might be listening. "How's it looking?" Cadden asked, trying to keep his nerves from showing. "Like a mess, but a promising mess. I think I can make this work." "Good. Let's give Merrick a taste of interstellar indigestion." As they tinkered, the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see if this was the moment it would swallow them whole. The device was a gamble, but in a city built on rust and despair, gambling was the only game in town. Cadden's comm crackled to life with a burst of static, Merrick's voice slicing through like a jagged knife. "Cadden, buddy, you're not thinking of trying anything stupid, are you?" Cadden smirked, imagining Merrick's smug face on the other end. "Stupid's my middle name. Well, that and reckless, but you know who's counting. Just sit tight. We're almost done here, and then you can." "Go to hell, Merrick," Cadden interrupted, cutting off the comm with a satisfying beep. "I'm done playing nice." Zexa gave him a sideways glance. "You realize that might have just made him angrier, right? He was already planning to kill us. I'm just saving him the effort of pretending otherwise." The device suddenly flared, its lights dancing in a pattern that seemed almost excited. It was ready, a coiled viper waiting to strike. "All right," Cadden said, determination hardening his voice. "Let's make some noise." With a final, decisive press of a button, Zexa activated the device. The air shimmered and a pulse shot outward, an invisible wave of chaos and disruption. Somewhere in the distance, alarms began to wail, and the strained hum of technology struggling to cope echoed through the corridors. Zexa laughed, a sound filled with disbelief and triumph. "I think it's working," Cadden grinned. "Let's move before Merrick decides to redecorate the landscape with our entrails." With the disruption in place, they set out toward the armory with a newfound confidence, each step echoing with the promise of payback. The corridors felt less oppressive, the oppressive metal walls no longer mocking but echoing their resolve. As they approached Sector 7, the sounds of confusion and chaos met them, a symphony of shouts, curses, and the occasional blaster shot going wide. Merrick's men were floundering, their comms and weapons struggling to function in the wake of the device's interference. Cadden ducked around a corner, peering down the corridor that led to the armory. Merrick stood in the center, barking orders, his face twisted in frustration. Around him, his men scrambled, their coordination unraveling like a cheap sweater. "Looks like we hit a nerve," Zexa noted, her voice tinged with satisfaction. "And now we hit the rest of him," Cadden said, his eyes narrowing. The time for half measures was over. They had Merrick on the ropes and they weren't about to let him wriggle off the hook. They advanced with purpose, each step measured and deliberate. Cadden's pulse pounded in his ears, a drumbeat of adrenaline and determination. He could see Leora, her eyes fierce with defiance, even as she was held by Merrick's men. She caught sight of them, and a spark of hope ignited in her gaze. Cadden moved like a shadow, quick and silent, until he was close enough to see the whites of Merrick's eyes. With a nod to Zexa, he signaled the next part of their plan into action. A flashbang, pilfered from a previous escapade, sailed through the air, landing with a clang at Merrick's feet. Before anyone could react, it detonated, filling the corridor with a searing light and deafening sound. The chaos that followed was music to Cadden's ears. With Merrick and his men temporarily blinded and disoriented, Cadden and Zexa sprang into action. They moved like dancers in a macabre performance, each movement precise and deadly. Cadden's blaster barked, sending bolts of energy into the confusion, while Zexa covered him, her aim true despite the chaos. Leora took the opportunity to break free, elbows and feet flying as she fought her captors with a ferocity that was almost beautiful to watch. Within moments, she was at Cadden's side, grabbing a weapon from a fallen goon. "Nice of you to join the party," Cadden quipped, covering her as she found her footing. Leora grinned, her breath coming in harsh gasps. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." Together, they pressed the attack, forcing Merrick's men into retreat. The element of surprise was theirs, and they wielded it like a scalpel, cutting through the opposition with ruthless efficiency. Merrick, recovering from the flashbang, staggered to his feet, his face a mask of rage. "You think this changes anything?" he shouted over the din. "You're still outnumbered. Quality over quantity, Merrick," Cadden shot back, a wild grin spreading across his face. "And we've got quality in spades." The tide had turned, the balance of power shifting with each passing second. Merrick's men, disoriented and demoralized, were falling back, their resolve crumbling in the face of the unexpected onslaught. Cadden, Zexa, and Leora pushed forward, step by relentless step, until Merrick stood alone, the last bastion of his crumbling empire. His eyes blazed with fury and desperation, a cornered beast with nothing left to lose. "You're making a mistake," Merrick spat, his voice dripping with venom. "I'll hunt you down. I'll save it," Zexa interrupted, her blaster trained on him with unwavering precision. "You've already lost. Time to face the music." Cadden leveled his own weapon, eyes cold and unyielding. "We're done playing your game, Merrick. This ends now." For a moment the world held its breath, the fragile silence a prelude to the inevitable. Merrick's gaze flickered between them, weighing his options, calculating his chances. Finally, with a sneer of defiance, he lowered his weapon, the fight leaving his eyes. "Fine, you win, but this isn't over." Cadden exchanged a glance with Zexa and Leora, a shared understanding passing between them. "Oh, it's over," he said, his voice firm and resolute. "For you, at least." With that they turned away, leaving Merrick to stew in the ruins of his defeat. They had fought their way back from the brink, defied the odds, and emerged victorious. But as they made their way back through the battered corridors, the weight of their actions settled over them like a shroud. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and doubt. But for now they had each other, and that was enough. In a universe that thrived on chaos and despair, they had carved out a small, defiant slice of hope. And in the end, wasn't that all anyone could ask for? Cadden leaned against the corridor wall, trying to catch his breath. The metal felt cold against his back, a reminder that comfort was a luxury they couldn't afford. His mind reeled with possibilities, each one more absurd than the last. Leora was free for now, but Merrick's grip still loomed large, like an overzealous landlord with eviction on his mind. Zexa crouched beside him, fiddling with the alien device that had saved their skins. "You know," she said, glancing up, "if this thing had a warranty, I'd have returned it by now. Just saying." Cadden grinned, though it felt more like a grimace. "Too late. We already voided it when we decided to use it as our personal chaos generator." Leora joined them, her expression a mix of relief and determination. She wiped a smear of grime from her cheek, only to replace it with more. "What's the plan? Preferably one that doesn't involve me getting kidnapped again." "Plan?" Cadden echoed. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe we grab a drink." "Discuss the existential dread of our existence," Zexa snorted. "Right, because discussing our inevitable demise is always better with alcohol." The corridor around them shuddered, metal groaning like an old man with bad knees, reminding them that time was not on their side. The satellite Metropolis was falling apart, and they were along for the ride unless they did something about it. "I think we should pay a visit to the Armory," Cadden suggested, examining the alien device like it might whisper secrets just for him. "If this thing can disrupt Merrick's toys, maybe we can upgrade our arsenal. Level the playing field." Leora arched an eyebrow. "And by upgrade you mean what? Slap some duct tape on a blaster and pray." "Exactly," Cadden replied. "Think of it as a DIY project with life-or-death stakes." "Brilliant," Zexa said, standing up and dusting off her hands. "Let's go make some poor life choices." They moved in unison, a trio of misfits determined to rewrite their fate. As they crept through the winding corridors, Cadden's thoughts were a jumbled mess of tactical considerations and inappropriate jokes. It was a coping mechanism, really. If he couldn't laugh now, he might never get the chance. Sector 7 was a labyrinth of decay, the walls scarred by time and conflict. It was like walking through a history lesson that couldn't decide on a theme. The Armory lay ahead, a beacon of potential violence in a world that thrived on it. "Why does it always have to be Sector 7? Leora mused aloud as they approached. "It's like every bad decision in the universe converges here. Probably because it's where all the cool kids hang out," Zexa quipped. "Or the desperate ones. Same difference." Cadden peered around a corner, the Armory's entrance just within sight. "All right, here's the plan. We go in, we grab what we can, and we hope we don't trigger anything that goes boom." "Solid plan," Leora said. "Could use more explosions, maybe a car chase." "I'll see what I can do," Cadden replied dryly. They slipped into the armory, a cavernous room filled with promise and peril in equal measure. Weapons lined the walls, a smorgasbord of destruction for those with the right access codes. Unfortunately, they had none of those. Zexa approached one of the consoles, her fingers dancing over its surface. Let's see if I can sweet-talk our way in. Sweet-talk. More like threaten with imminent collapse, Cadden said, glancing around. Who designs these places? Serial killers. I'm guessing frustrated architects, Leora replied, keeping watch. Zexa murmured curses under her breath, the console beeping in protest as she worked her magic. Then, with a triumphant flourish, the lights around them flickered to life, illuminating their prize, a collection of alien tech that looked both promising and utterly incomprehensible. Jackpot, Cadden said, a grin spreading across his face. Now let's see if we can figure out how to use it without blowing ourselves up. Good luck with that, Zexa replied, gesturing to the bewildering array of devices. I'm fairly sure half of these are just paperweights with delusions of grandeur. They picked their way through the armory, selecting weapons that felt right in their hands, even if they had no idea what they actually did. It was a gamble, but then again, so was getting out of bed in the morning. Hey, look at this, Leora said, holding up a sleek, ominous-looking contraption. If this isn't a weapon of mass destruction, I'll eat my hat. Zexa examined it with a critical eye. Maybe, or it could be a really aggressive hairdryer. There's only one way to find out. Science, Cadden declared with mock solemnity, is all about testing the limits. And hoping the limits don't test back, Zexa added. They moved quickly, every second in the armory a reminder of the precariousness of their situation. The ticking of an invisible clock pressed on them, each tick a reminder that Merrick and his goons were still out there, somewhere in the chaos. Cadden looked at his companions, the weight of leadership settling on his shoulders like an unwanted coat. He was no hero, but then again, heroism was overrated. Survival was the real prize, and he was hell-bent on claiming it. All right, let's get out of here before we regret every life choice that led us to this moment, he said. Too late, Leora replied, but she smiled as she said it. They moved with purpose, the armory fading into the background as they retraced their steps. The corridors seemed narrower now, the walls closing in like the jaws of some great beast. It was a sensation they ignored, focusing instead on the task at hand. Do you think Merrick's figured out what we're up to? Leora asked as they navigated the labyrinthine passages. Probably, Cadden replied. But if he has a lick of sense, he's regretting that too. The ground trembled beneath them, a reminder that the city was as fragile as a politician's promises. It was a bad time for philosophical musings, but Cadden couldn't help himself. Life, he mused, was a series of unfortunate events strung together by moments of sheer stupidity. They reached a junction, the path ahead obscured by shadows and uncertainty. It was the perfect metaphor, and Cadden hated metaphors almost as much as he hated Merrick. Which way? Zexa asked, scanning the area. Left, Cadden decided after a moment's hesitation. Always left. It's like my life motto. And here I thought it was shoot first, ask questions never, Leora said with a smirk. That too, Cadden conceded. The air grew thicker as they pressed on, the oppressive weight of the city a constant companion. It was a hell of their own making, but if they were going down, they'd do it with style. As they neared the heart of Sector 7, the sounds of chaos grew louder. Merrick's men were scattered, their coordination shattered by the alien device's interference. It was a beautiful mess, and Cadden relished it. He glanced at his companions, a motley crew of survivors bound by necessity and the occasional moment of camaraderie. They were flawed, and that made them perfect for this world. The universe was a cruel, uncaring place, but together they could carve out a small piece of it to call their own. Ready? He asked, his voice a low rumble. As I'll ever be, Leora replied, her grip on her weapon firm. Let's give Merrick a proper send-off, Zexa added, her eyes gleaming with determination. They moved as one, a force of nature unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. The corridors echoed with the sounds of battle, the clash of wills and technology, a symphony of chaos. It was exactly the kind of mess they lived for. Merrick stood in their path, his expression a mix of disbelief and rage. Around him, his men floundered, their weapons as useless as thoughts and prayers in the face of a hurricane. "You again," Merrick snarled, his voice dripping with disdain. "Us again," Cadden replied, raising his weapon. "What can I say? We're like a bad penny always turning up." Merrick's face twisted into a sneer. "You think you've won? This is just the beginning." "Beginning, end, who's counting?" Leora retorted, her eyes locked on Merrick. The battle was swift and brutal, each movement precise and calculated. Cadden and his team fought with the ferocity of cornered animals, driven by the relentless need to survive. It was a dance of destruction, and they were the masters of the floor. Merrick fought back with a desperation that was almost impressive, but desperation could only delay the inevitable. Cadden's understanding of the alien weapons, honed through trial and error, gave him the edge. It was like playing chess against someone who thought checkers was the height of strategy. Within moments, Merrick was disarmed, his empire crumbling around him. The weapons of his downfall lay scattered, a testament to the folly of underestimating human ingenuity. "You're finished, Merrick," Cadden said, his voice steady and unforgiving. Merrick laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You think this changes anything? There's always someone else waiting to take my place." "Let them try," Zexa replied with a shrug. "We'll be ready." Leora stepped forward, her expression a mix of satisfaction and resolve. "Consider this your severance package, Merrick, generously provided by us." They left him there, a relic of a bygone conflict, and stepped into the uncertain future. The city groaned around them, a reminder that their victory was as fragile as their lives. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. As they made their way through the corridors, Cadden couldn't help but reflect on their journey. They had faced the worst the universe had to offer and come out the other side, bruised but unbroken. It was a victory of sorts, even if it felt hollow. "We did it," Leora said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah," Cadden replied, a weary smile on his lips. "We're still here." "That's got to count for something." Zexa chuckled, the sound a balm for their battered spirits. "And who knows? Maybe next time we'll find a way to do it without nearly dying." Cadden laughed, the sound echoing through the empty corridors. "Next time?" "Yeah, right." They walked on, the future uncertain but theirs to shape. In a universe that thrived on chaos, they had carved out a small, defiant slice of hope. And in the end, wasn't that all anyone could ask for? The satellite Metropolis was still falling apart, but for once, it was a little quieter. Without the constant threat of Merrick breathing down their necks, even the oppressive machinery grinding away in the background sounded almost peaceful, like a coffee grinder you'd forgotten was still running after a long night. Cadden looked around at the ruins, his hands on his hips. "Well, it's not exactly the Ritz, but at least it's ours." Zexa snorted, her fingers absently toying with an alien device she'd pocketed. "Yeah, nothing screams home sweet home like a death trap with questionable plumbing." Leora shot a glance at the sky, or what passed for it in a place that was more floating debris field than stellar panorama. "If we're gonna rebuild, we might need more than duct tape and hope." "Hope? What's that?" Cadden quipped. "I thought we traded all of it for bad decisions and alien tech." Leora nodded sagely. "True, but hope is resilient. Much like us after a night out in Sector 7. The three of them stood in what was left of the command center. It was an unassuming room, but it had the advantage of not actively trying to murder them, which made it pretty high-end by local standards. "So what's the plan, boss?" Zexa asked, her tone light but her eyes serious. "Scavenge parts until we can tape together a semblance of civilization," Cadden shrugged. Leadership wasn't really his forte, but they seemed to keep asking for it. "We start with stabilizing the sections that are still attached. If something looks like it'll drop us into the void, we make sure it doesn't." "Revolutionary idea," Leora deadpanned. "Hey, I aim to innovate," Cadden replied, grinning. Zexa tapped the alien device knowingly. "We could use this as a bargaining chip. There are factions out there that'd kill for a chaos generator. And probably us too, for good measure," Cadden said. "But you might have a point." We just need to find someone who sees value in not shooting the people they're trading with. Any candidates? Leora asked, pretending to scan a non-existent list. Well, there's the cult of the cosmic cheeseburger, Cadden suggested, but they might be a little too intense about their worship. I thought they were into that vegan thing now, Zexa mused. Sacred tofu or something. Leora shrugged. I hear there's a group in Sector 3 that's trying to start a new world order or some such nonsense. Maybe they'd be up for a chat. Sector 3. Great, because if there's one thing I love, it's dealing with wannabe dictators, Cadden muttered. But it's a start. They spent the next few hours arranging a meeting with the Sector 3 representatives, their messages sent via the kind of hacked-together tech that had more duct tape than actual wiring. It was more like sending a message in a bottle, except the bottle was a rusty can, and the ocean was an angry blob of electromagnetic interference. As they waited for a response, the three made their way through the sprawling remnants of the Metropolis, picking through the wreckage and salvaging what they could. It was a dirty job, but at least it kept them from pondering just how many kinds of apocalypse could rain down on their heads at any given moment. Look at this, Leora said, holding up a piece of alien tech that looked suspiciously like a blender. Do you think this is a weapon or just a really violent food processor? Zexa took it, inspecting it with a practiced eye. Depends, could be either or both. Makes a mean smoothie in a hell of a crater, Cadden grinned. Let's save it for a rainy day. Or for when we run out of coffee, Zexa replied. Because that's basically an emergency. They pushed onwards, supporting each other with jibes and dark humor. There was something oddly comforting about knowing that the universe was out to get them, but they were still able to find a reason to laugh at it. As they turned a corner, Cadden paused, noticing a group of scavengers rifling through debris. He sighed. Our friendly neighborhood vultures. Leora raised an eyebrow. Think they've found anything worth a damn? Not likely, Zexa said. But if anything explodes, we'll know we took the wrong turn. Let's give them a wide berth, Cadden suggested. Last thing we need is a turf war over who gets dibs on Merrick's leftover empire. The scavengers ignored them, too engrossed in their work, or perhaps just used to the sight of people trying to survive. Either way, Cadden wasn't about to stick around and tempt fate. Iors blended into one another until they received a message back from the Sector 3 representatives, agreeing to a negotiation. The meeting was set for the next day, in a neutral section of the satellite Metropolis that hadn't been claimed by any one group, mostly because it was a dull, echoing chamber that offered absolutely no strategic advantage. As they made their way to the meeting point, the trio shared a look of grim determination. This was it. Their chance to carve out some stability in a universe built on chaos. The representatives were already there when they arrived, a couple of grim-faced individuals who looked like they hadn't laughed since the last century. Cadden hoped their sense of humor wasn't as broken as their surroundings. Welcome, one of them said, his voice as dry as the air in the satellite's atmosphere processors. Shall we get to business? Cadden nodded, gesturing for his team to flank him. Let's cut to the chase. We've got something you want, and maybe you've got something we want. Stability, cooperation, and a chance to survive the next month without getting spaced. The representative considered him for a moment. And what makes you think we're interested in such a cooperative venture? Zexa stepped in, her tone casual yet firm. Because if we keep going the way we're going, there won't be enough left of this place for anyone to fight over. You might be able to hold some territory, but what's the point if it's all just rust and ash? She's got a point, Leora added. And besides, we've got this, she gestured to the alien device. A chaos generator, useful for keeping pesky things like Merrick from ruining your day. The representatives exchanged glances, their stony expressions softening ever so slightly. And what do you want in return? Cadden leaned forward, his eyes meeting theirs with a steely resolve. We want a truce. We want to rebuild, stabilize this place, and make sure it doesn't tear itself apart every other Tuesday. We can't do that alone. Ambitious, the representative said. But not impossible. However, how do we know this isn't some trick to gain control? Cadden shrugged. You don't. But then again, if we wanted to screw you over, there are easier and less diplomatic ways to do so. Zexa nodded. Diplomacy isn't our strong suit, but neither is dying miserably in a derelict satellite. So here we are. The representatives exchanged another look, this time with the faintest hint of amusement. Perhaps there is a way forward, one of them said, almost reluctantly. They spent the next few hours haggling over details that all boiled down to who got which piece of this floating death trap. It was like negotiating over a half-eaten pie, except the pie was inedible, and everyone was secretly hoping the other party would just keel over mid-discussion. Eventually, they hashed out the semblance of an agreement. It wasn't perfect, barely functional really, but it was a start. As they shook hands, Cadden felt a flicker of hope, as if maybe, just maybe, they'd managed to pull themselves out of the fire and into slightly less scorching flames. As the representatives left, Zexa let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Well, that's one way to spend a day off. Yeah, Leora said, her voice tinged with relief and exhaustion. But for once, I think we might have actually done something right. Cadden nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. Let's not jinx it by saying that out loud too often. They headed back to their makeshift base, the weariness of the day settling over them like a thick blanket. But underneath the exhaustion was a sense of camaraderie and achievement, the knowledge that they'd managed to pull something resembling victory from the jaws of chaos. The next days were a blur of activity as they coordinated with the other factions, trying to piece together a semblance of order from the wreckage. There were setbacks, obviously. This was still the satellite Metropolis after all, but there was also progress. Who knew rebuilding a society involved this much paperwork? Zexa groused one evening, staring at a tablet filled with more bureaucracy than she'd ever cared to see in her life. Leora leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms above her head. At least it's better than dodging blaster fire every 5 minutes. And we've still got our secret weapon, Cadden added, tapping the alien device. If things get too out of hand, we can always threaten to turn this place into confetti. Effective, Zexa agreed, though probably not great for property values. Days turned into weeks, and slowly the satellite Metropolis began to show signs of life beyond mere survival. Installations were repaired, new settlements cropped up, and there was even talk of re-establishing a trade route with other colonies. Cadden stood on a balcony one evening looking out at the flickering lights of the city as it stubbornly persisted, despite everything the universe had thrown at it. Leora joined him, a mug of something hot and suspiciously caffeinated in hand. Not bad for a bunch of misfits, she said, nodding towards the bustling streets below. Yeah, Cadden said. Not bad at all. Zexa appeared beside them, rubbing her hands to ward off the chill. You guys getting all sentimental on me. Wouldn't dare, Cadden replied, grinning. She smiled back, her eyes reflecting the faint glow of the city. Good, because I'd hate to think we were turning into optimists. The three of them stood there, overlooking the satellite Metropolis they'd somehow managed to save. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was theirs, and that was enough. To the future, Leora said, raising her mug in a mock toast. The future, Zexa echoed, clinking her imaginary glass. Cadden nodded, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the drink. To us, he said quietly. They stood there in comfortable silence, a trio of survivors who'd somehow managed to beat the odds and find a place in a universe that seemed hell-bent on tearing them down. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was an ending they could live with. For now, at least.